Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something really special. We're using a fascinating genealogical biography to essentially open up a vibrant window straight into 19th century America. We are going to explore this massive era through the seemingly ordinary, but honestly deeply extraordinary, lives of Alpheus B. Smith and Elizabeth Horton Dill. Because, their story isn't just some dusty family tree, it's a front-row seat to the complete transformation of a nation. Just to give you a sense of the sheer scale here, think about the timeline of their lives. Elizabeth was born in 1791. We're talking right after George Washington became president, and she lived all the way until 1869. So through the span of just these two lives, they actually witnessed America evolve from a brand new republic right on through the absolute devastation of the Civil War, all the way to the birth of the Industrial Revolution. It's a huge sweep of history.
Okay, here's our quick agenda for the Explainer today. 1. The farmer and the teacher. 2. A Medfield marriage. 3. Tragedy strikes early. 4. The probate process. 5. A widow's resilience. And 6. Echoes of a century. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The Farmer and the Teacher. Divergent Beginnings.
So what's really fascinating right off the bat is the stark contrast between these two. You've got Alpheus, born in 1802, who comes from this very traditional, deeply rooted agricultural background in Medfield. And then you have Elizabeth, born on Cape Cod 11 years earlier in 1791. And she was this fiercely independent woman who had actually relocated to Dedham to carve out a career for herself as a teacher. I mean, it was incredibly uncommon for the time to see a younger, traditional farmer marrying an older, educated, independent career woman.
To really understand Elizabeth, you have to look at her early life because it totally sets the stage for her independence. She actually lost her mother when she was just 6 years old, growing up in a chaotic household of 9 children in Eastham. But instead of just staying put, she went after an education. By 1821, she had moved 20 miles away to a more urban environment in Dedham. And you have to remember, teaching was literally one of the only avenues for a woman to gain independence and upward mobility before marriage in the early 1800s. She was also making her own spiritual choices, embracing an adult baptism at St. Paul's Episcopal Church when she was 30. She was absolutely a woman charting her own course.
Section 2. A Medfield marriage, settling together. After they married in November 1826, they settled down in Medfield. Now, in the official land records, Alpheus was consistently described as a yeoman, and that's a term we don't hear much anymore, but back then it was a highly respected title. Basically, it meant he wasn't a landless laborer, but he also wasn't wealthy gentry. He was firmly in that self-sufficient, landed middle class. His entire life would have been dictated by the seasonal, agricultural rhythms of rural Massachusetts, working his land right near the South Schoolhouse where they lived.
By 1830, their household was buzzing. The census data from that year gives us this perfect little snapshot of their lives. We see Alpheus and Elizabeth, along with a little girl under 5 who would be their young daughter, Lucretia. But what's really interesting is that the record also shows an elderly woman in her 80s living right there with them. And this perfectly highlights the multi-generational living arrangements that were just the absolute bedrock of agrarian communities. It wasn't just a nuclear family. Extended family was deeply woven into the daily survival of the homestead.
Section 3. Tragedy strikes early. Winter of 1840.
It's really hard for us to wrap our heads around today, given modern medicine, but sudden winter deaths from respiratory illnesses were terrifyingly common back then. The average life expectancy in early 19th century America was actually only about 40 years old. And tragically, Alpheus fell victim to this harsh reality. He died suddenly in January 1840, at just 37 years old. Just like that, Elizabeth was a widow with 2 young children. There is this haunting inscription carved right into his gravestone at Vine Lake Cemetery in Medfield. It reads, "Farewell, my wife and children too, I can no longer stay with you. My portion in heaven I wish to share, prepare for death." It gives us this incredibly moving, emotional anchor to the devastating reality of his passing. It's a stark reminder that behind all these historical census documents and property deeds, there was profound human grief. Elizabeth was now 48 years old, thrust into single motherhood in an era that was notoriously unforgiving to women without husbands.
Section 4. The Probate Process, Legal Labyrinth.
Because Alpheus died suddenly without a will, his grieving family was immediately thrown into a really fascinating but incredibly rigid legal labyrinth. And the crucial number here is $839. That was the total value of Alpheus's estate, meticulously calculated by the probate court. To put that into perspective for us today, it's roughly $30,000 to $40,000. So it paints a very clear picture. They weren't rich by any means, but they had tangible, respectable wealth tied up in the land they worked.
The court inventory essentially stripped their entire life down into a list of assets and debts. They had $720 in real property, so their land and buildings, and $119 in personal property, meaning tools, livestock, and household goods. But because of outstanding debts, the court actually declared the estate insolvent. So, out of everything they had built together, the court set aside a dower portion of just $115 to legally support Elizabeth.
Dying intestate without a will in 1840 triggered these very strict legal mechanics. It was a rigid 5-step process. First, the court appoints an administrator. Then, the estate is fully inventoried. Step 3, that small dower portion is legally assigned to the widow. Step 4, and this is wild by today's standards, a separate guardian had to be appointed just to manage the potential inheritance of Elizabeth's own children, because women had such limited legal rights. And finally, Step 5, the real estate is sold off to satisfy creditors.
Section 5. A widow's resilience, strength, and independence.
Now remember, Elizabeth was no stranger to independence, and how she navigated this rigid system is just remarkable. This is where her family network activates. In 1840, her brother James H. Dill stepped up and bought 16 acres of the main estate for $358, essentially shielding the family property. Meanwhile, Elizabeth took absolute, calculated control of what little she was granted. By 1841, she strategically liquidated her own dower portion, selling it to another woman named Lucy Butterfield for $100 in cash. She literally generated her own liquid capital to survive.
Instead of letting the system defeat her, she leaned right back into that early independence of hers. She actually made the calculated choice to decline administering her husband's insolvent estate to protect herself from liability. She successfully raised both of her children, Lucretia and James, to adulthood, which, given the child mortality rates back then, was a massive feat. By 1855, records show she was cohabitating with Lucy Butterfield, the exact same widow who bought her land earlier. And by 1860, she was running a boarding house. She formed these mutually beneficial households with other women and boarders to make sure her family didn't just survive, but thrived.
Section 6. Echoes of a Century, a Macro View.
So let's step back for a second. Through their personal milestones, we have quite literally just traced the massive transformation of America. Think about it. Alpheus was born into a quiet, pre-industrial colonial farm town. They got married right during the expansion of public education. His sudden death starkly highlighted the brutal realities of 19th century mortality and those really rigid probate laws. And by the time Elizabeth passed away in 1869, the entire country had endured the Civil War and emerged as a bustling, modernizing, industrialized nation. Elizabeth ended up outliving Alpheus by nearly 3 decades. She passed away in 1869 of a stroke at the impressive age of 78 and was ultimately laid to rest right beside Alpheus in Medfield. She successfully navigated a whole century, a complex legal system, and an economy that were in so many ways entirely designed to work against a single woman. Her legacy is just this phenomenal testament to quiet strength, devotion, and incredible adaptability.
You know, when we look at standard census data or old property deeds, it is so easy to just see names and numbers on a page. But as Alpheus and Elizabeth show us, there is vibrant, struggling, triumphant life behind every single document. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. I really hope this deep dive encourages you to look a little closer at the hidden history resting quietly in your own town's archives. Because honestly, what incredible stories of resilience might be hiding right now in your own family tree?